Something else of note is that in the root list, the root word list, Lincoln and Rath do not use vowels. Instead, we see these. So you'll see H instead of A, W instead of U, Y instead of I, and you'll also see an H with an apostrophe on top of it, which is essentially meant to be depicted as an apostrophe with an E afterwards. So apostrophe H is actually apostrophe E. So here's a comparison of spellings of root listings in Lincoln and Rath and the Isla hybrid orthography. So if you're looking in the root list in the 1986 dictionary, you're looking for Booth, this is what you'll see. So this root symbol tells us it's a root word. Then you see B, and then a W, and then a tilde L. So this hyphen means that it's a root word. It needs an ending to it. This number 2 means that there was a previous entry spelled exactly the same way, but it has a different meaning. So there's a Booth 1. This one is Booth 2. So that's how it's spelled in Lincoln and Rath in their root listing, volume 2 of their 1986 dictionary. This is the hybrid spelling. So this W is actually meant to be read as a U. So it's Booth. And this root word means rose. So this root word appears in the word bootlas, which basically means a wild rose bush. And if you're looking for Heich in the Lincoln and Rath dictionary, you won't find it under H-I-X, you'll find it under H-Y-X. Because in the root listing, they use Y to stand in for the letter I. And Heich means head. So the word Heichti means head. This one, you have an apostrophe H followed by an N, and then a Y, and an S. So this would be the hybrid spelling. So you have apostrophe, and then E, N, and instead of a Y, you have an I. So this is anise. So this is one of the rare instances where a root word can actually be used as a full word. You don't actually have to add anything to anise to stand for the word ant. You would have to change it if you were talking about my aunt. Then you would say anise gintz, and that would mean my aunt who's right here next to me. But overall, just using the word anise, you don't really have to add any suffixes to it. And then we have here, this root word is clack. So we have a barred lambda, we have an H, and then a K. So in the hybrid orthography, this would be spelled barred lambda, then an A instead of an H, and then K. So this root word means to paddle. So klakya means to paddle. Klakya. So aside from some regular English letters, the Lincoln and Rath orthography consists of the following symbols. So we have accented vowels. So we have an A with a slanted dash on top of it. So this is an accented A. So you do have regular A, regular I, regular U, but you also have these symbols. These are called grave accents. I believe the correct pronunciation is grave, but we tend to say that as grave here in North America. So these are grave accents, and these are different than the acute accent markers that we use in the hybrid orthography today. So these are converted to the hybrid orthography. So you see this dash on top of this A is pointing to the right. So that's an acute accent. These ones are all pointing to the left. So these are grave accents. They're pointing the opposite way of what you would see in the hybrid orthography. So this tells you where to place emphasis in a word, and not every word in the Lincoln Rath dictionary has these. Lincoln Rath believed that there is a predictable accent in the Haisla language, so they tended to not include accented vowels. They kind of assumed that you would know where the accent would be placed based on the word structure, but realistically that would require a lot of training in order for you to understand. So even me, in my own learning, I would consider myself to be an advanced learner, and even I am not able to work out exactly where accent should go in a word or emphasis in a word should go just by reading it without any accent markers. So these are very useful, but in the Lincoln Rath dictionary, you're not always going to find them in every word. There's also what I call glottalized. You can see I put a question mark beside glottalized because I'm not entirely sure what to call these, but sometimes you'll see a vowel with an apostrophe on top of it. This is something you would not see in the hybrid orthography. And we'll take a look at that a little bit later on. We'll see some examples of these symbols used in the Lincoln Rath 1986 dictionary. There's also what I call specialized vowels. Again, I didn't really know what to call them, but you have this symbol, which is kind of like an upside down C, upside down backwards C, and this is O. It's what we would it's represented by the letters A and U nowadays. Hein Vink actually used a letter O, but that stopped with Lincoln and Rath. So they actually used AU in some instances. They used something like this. It would actually be an apostrophe and then AU. This says O, which is a slightly different sound. And there's also AU. So this is what we would use instead of the letter O nowadays. But in some instances, Lincoln and Rath used this, which is sometimes called an open O in linguistic terminology, and it's basically O. So it's not A, like a regular A, and it's not O, like a regular O. It's kind of somewhere in between. It's O. This upside down E, upside down backwards E, is called a schwa. So this is something that is used in the Lincoln and Rath dictionary in some cases. They tend to not actually use the schwa in a lot of instances. You'll see a lot of consonants one right after another. And the schwa nowadays is used as a regular E, and it kind of breaks up a lot of consonant clusters and makes it visually easier to read. Sometimes you'll see this kind of fancy lowercase e. This is called an epsilon. It's borrowed from the Greek alphabet, and it makes an eh sound. So Hein Vink used an umlaut A in his first orthography, and then in his second orthography he used an actual letter E to stand for eh. But in some cases, Lincoln and Rath used this epsilon symbol for that sound. But again, these are specialized vowels. They only occur in some instances. Most of the time, you'll only see this open O or this epsilon in words that come from other dialects, from other languages, like Somal-Gyach and other places like that. So you don't actually see these in words that originate from Haisla-Kyala or Hanaksiala-Kyala, except for this schwa, which you see only in certain words in Lincoln and Rath. And they also have ejective or glottalized consonants. So these all have regular counterpoints. So there's a regular C, regular K, regular L. But there's also an ejective C, ejective K, glottalized L, glottalized M, and so on and so forth. So I talked before about these apostrophes being modifiers. So regular C sounds like t, and apostrophe C sounds like t. So that apostrophe takes this regular C and makes it more pronounced. It makes it ejective or kind of explosive. So again, all of these letters have regular counterpoints, and they'll have ejective or glottalized counterpoints. So I didn't list all of the regular letters. I'm just focusing on the specialized letters that you see in Lincoln and Rath. There's also rounded consonants. So Heinrich used these to a certain extent. And I think in his later studies, in his second orthography, he used a little raised circle or something like a degree symbol to represent these sounds. So these are rounded consonants. So this is gua, qua, qua, and hua. You also have uvularized consonants. So these are deeper sounds, like this letter G. There's a regular G, but there's also a G with this symbol on top. You see, it's kind of an angled symbol, and it's basically called a cairn. And it means that it's uvularized, or it's kind of a deeper, kind of guttural sound. So it's more like g, g. And this is hua, hua. And you have an X with a cairn on top, so this is h, h. And then you have a rounded X with a cairn on top, and this is hua, hua. There's lateral consonants. So this is an innovation that we had not previously seen. So this symbol here, this is called a lambda. Again, it's borrowed from the Greek alphabet, and it sounds like gla. Sounds like a DL. So if you think of the English word madly or gladly or sadly, that's the sound, that DL, gl sound. So this was particularly significant because Lincoln and Rath chose to use a single symbol to represent a single sound, whereas in Heinrich, they actually used a consonant combination. So instead of a single symbol, they actually used DH for this lambda symbol. They used LH for this symbol here, which is called a tilde L. So it's an L with a tilde going through it. They used a TH for this barred lambda symbol. And Heinrich also used a T with an apostrophe on top with the letter H for the ejective barred lambda. So you can see here, on this side we have single symbols representing single sounds, whereas in Heinrich before, we have consonant combinations, which can be problematic. So this was quite an innovation here. I think this is really quite brilliant, the fact that they used single symbols to represent single sounds. And they were the first ones to do so. And the next linguists that came after used consonant combinations instead of these single sounds or single symbols here. So keep these in mind. We'll be seeing these later on in a later video. There's also syllabic consonants. So they put a little dash underneath an L in some cases, or a dash underneath an M and a dash underneath an N. So this is meant to be read as, supposed to be a bracket. This is actually meant to be read as EL, EM, EN. So that symbol underneath, a little dash, basically refers to the letter E, or the schwa. They would actually use the schwa symbol. So I'm going to replace those. So a schwa and an L, schwa and an M, schwa and an N. That's essentially how these are meant to be read. This can be a little bit problematic because if you have another consonant after it, like say for example a T, then you have an L, or actually in front, if you have it in front, then you have T, and then you have an L with a little dash underneath it. If you compare that to this, where we have a T and then a schwa and an L, this schwa helps visually break up those consonants. But this is the way that Lincoln and Rath represent the syllabic consonants. Whereas in later orthographies, you would see a regular E in place of the little dash underneath each of these consonants. So they kind of start stacking different symbols, different diacritics on top of these syllabic consonants. So you have a syllabic L with an apostrophe on top. So this is basically meant to be like a resonant, a sound that has been glottalized. So it's basically a glottalized EL, glottalized EM, glottalized EN. So if we take this representation and copy, we're basically replacing these with glottalized consonants. So that's the way that these would be read. And then we have accented syllabic consonants. So it's the syllabic L with a grave accent on top, which would mean that it's an accented EL, accented EM, accented EN. And then we have the glottal stop / apostrophe. So it's an H with an apostrophe on top of it. It's basically meant to be read as apostrophe E in most cases. So let's put these in brackets. Oops. That's how it's meant to be read. So this can actually be a little bit confusing, a little bit hard to read, because people, if you're not familiar with the Lincoln and Rath orthography, you might read this as an actual H. So we'll see that later on, some of these issues that come up with this way of representing a glottal stop or an apostrophe.